The air hung thick and heavy outside the federal courthouse in New York, a palpable tension pressing down on the throngs gathered. It wasn't just another Tuesday, it was a reckoning. Shouts tore through the morning chill, a furious symphony of opposing ideals, protect AOC, clashing violently with deport her. The raw emotion crackled amidst the unyielding security barriers and the relentless, blinding flash of camera lights, each flicker a silent testament to the brewing storm. This wasn't just a trial, it was a spectacle, a public square where the future of a firebrand Congresswoman would be decided. Before we dive into the heart of this explosive story, a moment for you, our dedicated audience. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button, give us a like and ring that notification bell so you never miss a single twist or turn in the unfolding dramas that shape our world. Your engagement fuels our pursuit of the truth, unvarnished and unfiltered. Now back to the cold, stark reality within the courthouse walls. Inside, in the hushed, almost reverent chill of the courtroom, sat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the young, prominent, progressive Congresswoman. She occupied the defendant's chair, a stark contrast to the halls of power she usually commanded. Her back was ramrod straight, a defiant posture against the immense pressure, her eyes fixed forward, seemingly unblinking. Yet beneath that veneer of resolute composure, her fingers unwittingly betrayed her. They gripped her knees so tightly that her knuckles were white, revealing a torrent of anxiety that was far from ordinary. This wasn't the usual political skirmish. This was a personal fight for survival. The accusation against her was stark, chilling in its directness. She was charged with threatening violence. The evidence? Her very own words, uttered in a moment of incandescent rage. Lay a finger on them. We are going to have a problem. A statement intended perhaps as a warning now served as a lethal weapon wielded against her in the unforgiving arena of the court. At the prosecution's table, a figure of formidable calm sat with his arms crossed. Tom Homan, the former ICE Director. He was the man AOC had publicly savaged on national television, painting him as a villain. But here, in this setting, his face was placid, almost cold. For Homan, this was no longer a personal vendetta. This was an opportunity, a crucial moment to extinguish what he believed was a dangerous fire. A radical ideology that threatened the very fabric of national security. He embodied the unyielding resolve of law and order, pitted against what he saw as deliberate chaos. Behind AOC, a formidable team of lawyers, spearheaded by the renowned ACLU, huddled in hushed whispers. They delivered their final, urgent words of counsel before the trial officially commenced. They knew the gravity of the situation. One small misstep, one single error, and AOC could lose everything. Not just a minor setback, but the complete annihilation of her public image, the stripping away of her hard-won power, and most damningly, the loss of her seat in Congress. The stakes could not be higher. Then, with a resounding crash that echoed like thunder through the silent courtroom, the judge's gavel struck. All eyes, 1,000 unseen burdens, snapped to AOC. The crowded gallery held its breath, suspended in anticipation. The trial had begun. And as every person in that room understood, this wasn't just a trial for a congresswoman. This was a battle for the soul of a nation. The stifling courtroom air seemed to thicken as Prosecutor James Whitaker rose, his presence commanding. His black suit gleaming like a sharp blade under the harsh fluorescent lamps. All eyes, now freed from the intense scrutiny of AOC, shifted to him, hanging on his every move. He stood at the prosecution's table, a few meters from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who maintained a resolute, almost frozen expression. But Whitaker was not interested in facades. With a deep, cutting voice that seemed to slice through the tense silence, he began his opening argument. Each word was not just spoken, but hammered home, striking relentlessly at the very foundation of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's position, aiming to dismantle her credibility piece by agonizing peace. AOC, despite her outward calm, betrayed her internal struggle. Her hands, tightly gripping a pen, left dark smears of ink onto the paper beneath them as Whitaker launched his full, unyielding attack. "Your Honor," Whitaker declared, his gaze sweeping across the hushed audience before settling, like a predator on its prey, directly on AOC. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has far exceeded the boundaries of free speech. She has not only directly threatened Tom Homan, a dedicated law enforcement official, but also incited against the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, brazenly endangering national security. The weight of his words settled heavily on the room. As if to prove his point beyond a shadow of a doubt, he held up a tablet, its screen illuminating with a video from AOC's own public account. On the screen, her voice rang out raw and full of unbridled fury. "If they dare touch any of the Congress members, there will be serious consequences." Whitaker paused the video, letting AOC's damning words hang in the air, allowing their full, destructive power to sink into the minds of everyone present. "This," Whitaker announced, his voice devoid of emotion, "is not a political warning. This is a direct threat of violence, a clear and undeniable violation of Title 18, Section 875 of the United States Criminal Code." A murmur rippled through the audience. Some heads nodded in solemn agreement, while others, in quiet dissent, shook theirs. But the prosecutor's message was clearly resonating. AOC leaned to whisper urgently to her lead attorney, Elena Martinez, of the ACLU, her eyes flashing with a mix of anger and growing anxiety. Martinez, ever the calm strategist, placed a reassuring hand on her client's shoulder, a silent signal for her to maintain composure. But Whitaker was relentless. He continued, his voice rising and falling with the dramatic cadence of a stage actor, amplifying every accusation. "Furthermore, Your Honor," he pressed on, "the defendant has organized public workshops, actively encouraging illegal immigrants to evade ICE in blatant violation of Title 8, Section 1253. This action not only obstructs the law, but fundamentally undermines the tireless efforts of individuals like Tom Homan, a man who has dedicated his entire life to protecting this country." Whitaker stepped closer to the witness stand, holding aloft a stack of documents. "We have reports from ICE documenting the arrest of 27 Tren Naragua gang members in New York, a direct result of the exemplary work of Mr. Homan and his team. Meanwhile, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez stands with lawbreakers, using her position as a congresswoman to brazenly challenge order." He turned his piercing gaze to AOC, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "She calls it congressional oversight, but we, Your Honor, call it deliberate chaos." AOC bit her lip, a flicker of defiance in her eyes as she struggled to stay composed. She knew all eyes were on her, absorbing every accusation. Martinez scribbled notes with furious speed, already preparing a rebuttal, but Whitaker was far from finished. He moved to a large screen, displaying an incendiary ex-post by AOC, written after an incident at the Delaney Hall Detention Center. The post read, "ICE must not be allowed to abuse its power. We will not let them trample our communities." Whitaker pointed at the screen, his voice rising again. "This is not a call for unity. This is a call for resistance, undermining law enforcement and directly threatening Mr. Homan." Tom Homan, seated on the prosecution side, sat upright, his gaze as sharp as a blade. He offered a subtle nod to Whitaker, a silent acknowledgement that everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Homan, with over 3 decades in law enforcement, was being artfully portrayed by Whitaker as a symbol of unwavering dedication, a shield against the very chaos AOC seemed to embody. Mr. Homan is not just a victim of a threat, Whitaker declared, his voice thick with emotion, aiming straight for the jury's sympathy. He is at the forefront of the fight to protect our borders, to protect the very communities of Miss Ocasio-Cortez. Yet she responds by calling him a coward on social media. This is unacceptable behavior from a congresswoman. Whitaker paused, letting his words hang, allowing the audience to absorb the full weight of his indictment. He then stepped closer to the judge's bench, his voice lowering but carrying immense weight. Your Honor, the defendant's actions go beyond mere words. She has fueled a dangerous wave of resistance against ICE, making law enforcement officers feel threatened, putting their lives at risk. The consequences of her actions are not only legal, but profoundly moral. We request that this court consider referring this matter to the House Ethics Committee, where Miss Ocasio-Cortez's conduct could lead to her expulsion from Congress, a truly fitting punishment for her utter recklessness. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Some spectators clapped with fervor, while AOC's dwindling supporters jeered in protest. Judge Grayson banged his gavel, demanding silence, his stern gaze sweeping the agitated crowd. AOC felt her heart pound. The chilling threat of an ethics investigation, even expulsion, looming like a dark shadow. Martinez whispered, "We'll hit back hard. Don't let them shake you." But AOC couldn't hide the trembling in her hands as she glanced at Homan, who wore a subtle, almost imperceptible smile, a man already savoring victory. Whitaker concluded, his voice resolute, "Today, we are not only defending the law, but also those like Tom Homan who prioritize national security over divisive politics. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez must be held accountable." He sat down, leaving a heavy, oppressive silence in his wake. AOC stared at the table, trying desperately to regain her composure, but the crushing weight of the accusations and Homan's triumphant gaze made her feel utterly cornered. The battle had just begun, and the prosecution had landed a devastating first blow. A heavy, foreboding silence descended upon the courtroom as Elena Martinez, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's lead attorney from the ACLU, rose to her feet. Her posture was erect, her eyes sharp but uncharacteristically calm, a stark contrast to the prosecutor's earlier, almost predatory aggression. The only sounds were the rustle of papers and the hushed whispers from an audience collectively holding its breath, eager to see if the defense could possibly shift the oppressive tide. Martinez adjusted her glasses, a seemingly composed gesture that did little to convey the fire needed for the moment. Her voice, when it came, was clear and steady, but oddly academic, as if she were delivering a lecture rather than arguing a life-altering case. AOC, seated rigidly behind the defendant's table, clasped her hands tightly in her lap, a desperate attempt to mask the deepening unease that spread like a cold dread through her chest. She knew, with a gut-wrenching certainty, that Martinez faced an almost impossible uphill battle, especially after Whitaker's sharp, incisive attacks and Homan's smug, triumphant demeanor from the prosecution's side. "Your Honor," Martinez began, her tone steady, "Representative Ocasio-Cortez's statement was not, as the prosecution vehemently asserts, a threat of violence. It was, purely and simply, a political statement, one wholly protected by the First Amendment of the United States Constitution." She then transitioned almost too smoothly into what seemed like a routine explanation. She was merely fulfilling her crucial role in congressional oversight, tirelessly working to protect the immigrant communities of New York's 14th District from what she perceived as egregious ISIS abuses. Martinez held up a thin stack of documents, almost dismissively thin, attempting to lend weight to her argument. We have reports from various human rights organizations documenting deplorable conditions in ICE detention centers. Representative Ocasio-Cortez was speaking out for her constituents, advocating for their basic human dignity. But the argument, despite its legal grounding, strangely lacked persuasiveness. She cited legal precedents on free speech, referencing the landmark case of Watts versus United States, 1969, where the Supreme Court had ruled that a threat must be specific and direct to be unlawful. Representative Ocasio-Cortez's statement, "There will be serious consequences," was merely political rhetoric, Martinez stressed, her voice trying to find force, but ultimately lacking the resonance to sway the audience, or, more critically, the judge. A few of AOC's most ardent supporters nodded vigorously, but most spectators remained conspicuously skeptical, their expressions reflecting doubt rather than conviction. Whitaker, at the prosecution's table, allowed a faint smirk to play on his lips as he nonchalantly jotted notes, clearly unconcerned. Homan, in his crisp grey suit, sat with arms crossed, his gaze a piercing, unwavering stare fixed squarely on Martinez, an unspoken challenge in his eyes. Judge Harold Grayson, his expression now a definite frown, signaled Martinez to continue, but his body language unequivocally communicated his unimpressed state. AOC sensed the palpable shift in the room, the tide undeniably turning against her. She leaned over, whispering urgently to an assistant attorney, "We need to be stronger. They're controlling the narrative." But Martinez, seemingly oblivious to the mounting pressure, continued her measured, almost academic delivery. Martinez then pivoted, attempting a calculated attack on Homan himself. "Tom Homan and the Trump administration," she declared, her voice rising slightly but still lacking the necessary fire, "are clearly using this case as a political tool to silence Representative Ocasio-Cortez. They've exaggerated a single statement to smear her, all while ICE itself has faced widespread criticism for human rights violations. She presented a brief report on alleged ICE abuses, but tellingly failed to provide specific, compelling details that could actually undermine Homan's powerful upcoming testimony." Whitaker immediately objected, arguing the report was irrelevant to the current case, and the judge, without hesitation, agreed, directing Martinez to focus strictly on the charges at hand. Martinez's rebuttal began to visibly falter. She tried to emphasize that AOC acted solely in the community's interest, but she simply couldn't produce the compelling evidence needed to counter the obstruction of law enforcement charge effectively. Representative Ocasio-Cortez did not encourage any illegal actions, Martinez insisted, her voice now trembling slightly, as if she could feel the judge's scrutinizing gaze burning into her. She was merely educating people about their legal rights, an action protected by the Constitution. AOC bit her lip, a surge of raw frustration building within her. She wanted to leap to her feet, to shout at Whitaker and Homan that they were distorting the truth. But Martinez, sensing the escalating tension, subtly signaled her to stay silent. The audience began to murmur, some shaking their heads, sensing the undeniable weakness in Martinez's argument. A Fox News reporter scribbled furiously, already crafting a piece that would undoubtedly praise Homan. Homan, ever the opportunist, seized the moment, exchanging a brief, confident word with Whitaker, his eyes gleaming with a growing certainty of victory. He knew Martinez was struggling, and it only served to fortify his already strong position. Martinez concluded, her voice softening, almost pleading. "Your Honor, prosecuting Representative Ocasio-Cortez for this statement is not only a legal error, but a direct attack on free speech. If she is punished, it will send a chilling message that lawmakers cannot speak out for their constituents." She sat down, but the oppressive courtroom atmosphere clearly, undeniably favored the prosecution. Judge Grayson meticulously took notes, his expression cold and unreadable, betraying no hint of his thoughts. A chill ran down AOC's spine. She realized with a dawning horror that Martinez, though dedicated, had failed to counter the relentless onslaught from Whitaker and Homan. Homan, on the prosecution side, offered a subtle, almost imperceptible smile, as if already anticipating AOC's utter defeat. The audience, though divided, seemed swayed by his unwavering confidence. An AOC supporter whispered to a neighbor, "She needs to be stronger or they'll crush her." AOC overheard, and her heart tightened painfully. She knew her moment to testify was rapidly approaching, and any mistake, any misstep, could cost her dearly. Not just a fine, not just a reprimand, but the agonizing risk of an investigation by the House Ethics Committee, pushing her to the very brink of expulsion from Congress. The net was tightening. The courtroom air grew thick, heavy with unspoken anticipation as Tom Homan took the witness stand. His tall, imposing frame, impeccably dressed in a crisp grey suit, exuded the undeniable authority of a man forged by 34 years in the relentless crucible of law enforcement. The scattered murmurs that had persisted through Martinez's lackluster defense faded into an almost reverent silence, every eye fixed on the figure of raw, unyielding experience. Across the room, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat rigid, her fingers twisting a pen so tightly that it seemed poised to snap, a brittle reflection of her own internal tension. Elena Martinez, her lead ACLU attorney, whispered words of encouragement, but AOC's gaze was locked on Homan, who carried himself with the calm, predatory certainty of a seasoned hunter closing in on its prey. Both understood. Homan's testimony was not merely evidence, it was the final crushing weight that could seal AOC's political fate, pushing her inexorably toward the precipice of expulsion from Congress. Prosecutor James Whitaker approached, his steps deliberate and measured, like a chess master carefully arranging the pieces of an inescapable trap. "Mr. Homan," he began, his voice imbued with profound respect, "please share with the court your extensive experience and your vital role in protecting this country." Homan leaned slightly forward, his voice resonating through the hushed room, every word carrying the weight of decades of unwavering service. "I've served 34 years in law enforcement," he stated, his voice firm and unwavering, starting as a Border Patrol agent, later rising to become ICE's acting director. Now, as a border under President Trump, I'm tasked with securing our borders and communities from illegal activities. He paused, letting his formidable accomplishments sink in, allowing them to speak volumes for his character. "I have faced many threats throughout my career," he continued, his gaze subtly shifting towards AOC, "but I've never seen anything as reckless, as irresponsible, as Representative Ocasio-Cortez's words." The audience stirred slightly, a mix of agreement and discomfort rippling through the gallery. AOC clenched her jaw, her breathing quickening as Homan pressed on, delivering his indictment with chilling calm. "Her words! Lay a finger on them. We are going to have a problem. Weren't just a warning. They were a direct challenge to law enforcement, a dangerous incitement paving the way for chaos and violence." He turned fully, his sharp gaze piercing AOC, holding her in his unwavering stare. "She's not just undermining ICE, Your Honor. She's putting lives at risk." He then invoked his work as a direct counterpoint to her rhetoric. In New York alone, ICE arrested 27 Trenda Aragua gang members, making her district safer, yet she calls us oppressors. Whitaker nodded slowly, pacing. "Did you, Mr. Homan, feel personally threatened by those words?" Homan's response was calm, but cutting to the bone. I'm not easily intimidated, Mr. Whitaker. I've faced cartels, smugglers, and far worse, but her words incited hostility toward ICE agents who risk their lives daily. It's not just about me. It's about the brave men and women I lead, who deserve respect, not threats from a sitting Congresswoman. Murmurs of agreement rose from the conservative spectators, who nodded vigorously. Judge Grayson banged his gavel, demanding silence, but Homan's words hung like a dark, inescapable cloud over the room, the damage already done. AOC scribbled frantically on paper, her face a mask that barely concealed the raw anger surging within her. Martinez placed a reassuring hand on her arm, urging restraint, but AOC's eyes burned with fury. She knew Homan was painting her as the villain, and his testimony was powerfully swaying the entire courtroom. Whitaker pressed on, holding up a printout of an ex-post by AOC, the one calling Homan a coward. "This post, Mr. Homan," Whitaker said, "was written right after the alleged threat. How did it affect your work and the morale of your agents?" Homan's voice grew firmer, colder. "It fueled a dangerous narrative that ICE is the enemy. Agents reported increased hostility in the field. Protesters were emboldened by her words. She's not just a congresswoman, Mr. Whitaker. She's a public figure with millions of followers. And her words carry immense weight, often with devastating consequences." The prosecutor stepped back, allowing Homan's powerful testimony to dominate the space. "Mr. Homan," Whitaker asked, his voice low but unwavering, "do you believe her actions constitute obstruction of justice?" Homan leaned forward, his voice resonating with absolute conviction. "Absolutely. By instructing illegal immigrants on how to evade ICE, she violated Title 8, Section 1253. By threatening law enforcement, she crossed a line no public official, no one in a position of power, should ever cross. Her actions demand accountability, perhaps through an ethics investigation, leading directly to her removal from Congress." The audience gasped, the word removal striking like lightning, shaking the very foundations of the room. AOC stopped, writing, her face paling as she fully grasped the devastating weight of Homan's words. Martinez stood to cross-examine, her demeanor attempting confidence, but her strategy still shaky after her weak opening. "Mr. Homan," she began, her tone sharp but lacking the necessary ferocity to truly challenge him, "your testimony paints a dire picture. But hasn't ICE itself been criticized for human rights violations?" Homan didn't flinch, his response immediate and dismissive. "Every agency faces scrutiny, Miss Martinez. Our job is to enforce the law, not to be liked. Your client's job is to make laws, not incite resistance against them." Martinez tried, citing a report on poor detention conditions, but Homan effortlessly countered. "That report is outdated and irrelevant to this case. ICE has saved countless lives in New York, while your client's reckless rhetoric puts them at risk." Martinez's questions grew repetitive, lacking sharpness, utterly unable to unsettle him. She tried another angle, accusing him of political bias. "Isn't this case simply retaliation due to your unwavering loyalty to President Trump?" Homan's eyes narrowed, his voice like steel. "This isn't about politics, Miss Martinez. It's about the law. I've served 6 presidents, Democrat and Republican. Your client crossed the line, and I'm here to hold her accountable." His response landed like a physical punch, leaving Martinez reeling. AOC whispered urgently, "Be tougher, Elena." But Martinez seemed overwhelmed, her shoulders slumping. The audience sensed Homan's absolute dominance. A conservative supporter whispered, "He's crushing her." Even some of AOC's supporters grew uneasy, feeling the tide irrevocably turned towards Homan. Judge Grayson remained impassive, but his glances at Homan showed an undeniable respect for the veteran's composure and conviction. Martinez, defeated, sat down, her cross-examination ending without impact, a whimper rather than a bang. Homan stepped off the stand, walking confidently, a subtle smirk playing on his lips as he passed AOC's table. AOC felt the room closing in, the air growing suffocating. Homan's testimony had not only bolstered the charges against her, but had amplified the damning narrative that she was a dangerous instigator. The chilling prospect of an ethics investigation, possibly leading to outright expulsion, now haunted her every thought, a malevolent presence. She turned to Martinez, her voice low but urgent. "He's making me out to be a criminal. We can't let this continue." Martinez nodded, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. The courtroom's energy clearly belonged to Homan. His words had earned the admiration of those who saw him as a bulwark against chaos. Whitaker, sensing the impending victory, whispered to Homan, who nodded in satisfaction. The prosecutor's strategy was terrifyingly clear. Homan was the cornerstone, framing AOC as a national danger requiring the most severe punishment. The threat of an ethics investigation, potentially leading to expulsion, hung like a guillotine, blade over AOC's head. She looked at the audience where a few held "Support AOC" signs, but their desperate presence was dwarfed, overshadowed by the growing wave of criticism, a tide of condemnation. As the trial paused for a brief recess, AOC remained seated, her mind in turmoil. She knew her testimony was next, and the pressure to somehow counter Homan's overpowering performance was immense, almost unbearable. Every social media post, every fiery speech she had ever given, was now a weapon in the prosecutor's hands, twisted and aimed squarely at her. Homan, meanwhile, stood beside Whitaker, exuding the calm, unshakable confidence of a man who had faced countless challenges and inevitably always prevailed. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, clad in a striking navy blazer that seemed to mock the turmoil within, took the witness stand. Her eyes blazed with a fierce, defiant fire, but beneath that resolute exterior, a current of raw anxiety swirled. After Tom Homan's utterly overpowering testimony, the room seemed to lean entirely in his favor, and AOC knew, with chilling certainty, that every gaze was scrutinizing her every move, dissecting her for any sign of weakness. Her attorney, Elena Martinez, though overshadowed in the earlier cross-examination, now placed all her hopes in this critical moment, trusting that AOC herself could somehow, miraculously, turn the unforgiving tide. But Prosecutor James Whitaker, a subtle, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips, was ready to set his trap. AOC took a deep, shaky breath, bracing for the inevitable storm. Judge Harold Grayson, his gaze as icy and unreadable as ever, signaled Martinez to begin. Martinez stood, striving to inspire confidence, her voice a fragile attempt at command. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez," she began, "please explain your intent. When you stated there would be a problem if ICE officials acted against members of Congress." AOC leaned forward, her voice clear, but with a slight betraying tremor. "I wasn't threatening violence, Your Honor," she stated, attempting to reclaim the narrative. "It was a statement about political accountability. I meant that if ICE abused its power, my community would respond through votes, through peaceful protests, and through public opinion. As a Congresswoman, I have a duty to protect my constituents, especially immigrants facing unjust treatment." Martinez nodded, guiding her. "Can you elaborate on your role in defending your community?" AOC seemed to find a fleeting moment of composure, her voice growing stronger. "I represent New York's 14th District, home to hard-working immigrant families, often harassed by ICE. I've visited detention centers, heard harrowing stories of deplorable conditions, of children cruelly separated from parents. I speak out for them because it's my job to ensure the government doesn't trample on human rights." A few scattered supporters in the audience clapped softly, but Grayson's gavel quickly, sternly silenced them. Martinez pressed further, asking about AOC's social media posts and community workshops. AOC responded, her voice brimming with passion. I held meetings to educate people about their legal rights, like the right to remain silent, the right to an attorney. That's not obstructing ICE. It's giving people tools to protect themselves under the Constitution. But despite her fervor, many spectators remained skeptical, swayed by Homan's earlier powerful testimony. Homan, at the prosecution's table, sat with arms crossed, his gaze suggesting AOC's words were mere flimsy excuses. Martinez, sensing her work was done, sat down, yielding the floor to Whitaker. The prosecutor rose, moving slowly like a panther, ready to pounce. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, he began, his voice smooth but chillingly precise. You claim your statement was purely political, so why use the phrase a problem, which could easily be taken as a direct threat? AOC inhaled sharply, striving to remain calm. In that context, she explained, I was defending my congressional colleagues from abuse of power. I was emphasizing that ICE's actions wouldn't be tolerated, not through violence but through democratic accountability. Whitaker smiled, but the smile never reached his eyes. He raised a tablet, replaying AOC's own fiery video, her voice echoing. Angrily, if they dare touch any of the Congress members, there will be serious consequences. He paused the video, staring at AOC. You call this democratic accountability, or a public call to defy ICE? AOC shook her head, her voice rising. No, I wasn't calling for violence. I was talking about the power of the community, of voters, of... Whitaker cut her off, his voice sharp as a blade. The community. Are you aware that after that speech, ICE agents in New York reported being threatened, having rocks thrown at them during protests? AOC opened her mouth to retort, but Whitaker pressed on, his tone growing harsher. You called Mr. Homan a coward in front of millions of followers. Do you think that didn't incite hostility? AOC clenched her fists, her voice starting to shake with barely suppressed fury. I called him that because he targets vulnerable immigrants instead of addressing real issues. That's the truth, not incitement. Whitaker stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper, but heavy with pressure. The truth? Or were you deliberately undermining a federal agency, encouraging illegal immigrants to evade the law, and threatening people like Mr. Homan, who protect this country? AOC felt blood rush to her face, her chest tight with uncontainable rage. You're twisting my words, she shouted, leaping to her feet, her finger pointing directly at Whitaker. ICE abuses its power. It detains children in horrific conditions, and Homan is behind it all. He's suppressing my free speech, my community's free speech. The courtroom erupted into pandemonium. Spectators jeered, some clapped, others shouted. In protest, a cacophony of outrage and support. Judge Grayson pounded his gavel repeatedly, his voice thundering over the chaos. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, sit down immediately. One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt. Martinez quickly pulled AOC back to her seat, whispering urgently, Alex, calm down. You're making things worse. But AOC's face was flushed, her breathing heavy, her eyes still burning toward Whitaker and Homan. Homan, with a faint, chilling smile, sat with arms crossed, as if watching his opponent dig her own grave. Whitaker, seizing the crucial moment, turned to the judge. Your Honor, he declared, his voice ringing with triumph. The defendant's outburst just now clearly shows her lack of control and utter defiance of the law. This is precisely what we've been emphasizing. Miss Ocasio-Cortez not only threatened Mr. Homan, but blatantly disrespects the judicial system. He sat down, leaving AOC exposed under the audience's scrutinizing gaze. Some of her supporters bowed their heads, sensing imminent defeat. Others, especially conservatives, whispered among themselves as if foreseeing the inevitable outcome. AOC bowed her head, hands covering her face, trying desperately to regain composure. Her dramatic outburst, shouting, pointing, had made her the focal point of criticism, a headline screaming, "AOC panics in court." Martinez, with a worried look, scribbled on paper, preparing for the next phase. But she knew AOC's actions had gravely weakened their already precarious case. Homan, at the prosecution's table, exchanged a brief word with Whitaker, his eyes gleaming with clear triumph. He knew AOC's impulsiveness was a gift to the prosecution, reinforcing the narrative that she was a dangerous figure who needed to be punished. Judge Grayson signaled a recess, but his gaze on AOC was stern, heavily weighing the consequences of her outburst. As the audience streamed out, murmurs continued unabated, whispers about the very real possibility of AOC facing an ethics investigation or even expulsion from Congress. AOC remained seated, her breathing slowly steadying, but her heart heavy with the crushing realization. She knew her earlier moment had not only damaged her image, but had handed Homan and Whitaker the decisive advantage they needed to utterly weaken her position. Martinez whispered, "We still have a chance, but you have to control yourself." AOC nodded, but inside she felt like she was standing on a precipice, with Homan and the relentless prosecution waiting for her to fall. The stares from the courtroom attendees, the judge, and even the prosecution still haunted her, as if they had just witnessed a major, irreparable crack in her defensive wall. The doors of the federal courtroom closed, pausing the high stakes. Trial for a verdict. But outside, a media storm erupted, its tempest spreading from the agitated streets to the farthest corners of cyberspace. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stepped out of the courthouse, her eyes still bearing the telltale traces of tension from her earlier outburst and the devastating impact of Daniel Rivera's surprise testimony. Surrounding her were her dedicated legal team and a small, embattled group of supporters holding AOC as a hero signs, but their defiant presence was quickly overwhelmed by the shouts from an opposing larger crowd and the incessant, blinding flash of camera lights. Meanwhile, Tom Homan, with a confident stride and a subtle, knowing smile, became the immediate focus of effusive praise from conservative media outlets, instantly portrayed as a unwavering beacon of law and order. Fox News led the charge, commentators hailing Homan as an unyielding warrior. Tom Homan stood tall against AOC, exposing her danger. One host shouted, the screen flashing the bold, triumphant headline, "Homan crushes AOC." Newsmax went even further, replaying AOC's courtroom outburst on a loop with the damning caption, "The fall of a radical Congresswoman." On social media, Homan posted a terse, victorious message. ICE protects the public despite people like AOC. The law always wins. The post garnered thousands of shares, flooded with comments like, "Homan is a hero," and "Kick AOC out of Congress." Even President Donald Trump chimed in, posting, "AOC went too far, daring to challenge Tom Homan. She doesn't belong in Congress." Progressive outlets like MSNBC attempted a desperate defense of AOC, calling the entire case a politically motivated witch hunt aimed at silencing a vocal critic. But their voices seemed drowned out by the thunderous narrative of Homan's triumph and AOC's perceived downfall. Did this chapter bring you to the edge of your seat? The battle is far from over, but the tides have certainly shifted. Don't miss a single moment of this unfolding drama. Like this video, share it with your friends. Leave your comments below with your thoughts on what just transpired. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell for the final verdict and all the latest updates.